Sure. So in late 18th, early 19th century England, so you have the blasphemy crisis. So you have figures like Thomas Paine, whose Age of Reason I think rivals anything that the quote unquote new atheists are writing today. He's writing it in defense of deism. So he has this belief in a deistic God who just creates the cosmos and doesn't interfere. He doesn't micromanage, in the silly way that you get in the God of the Bible. But really, it's an anti-theist track. He's directly attacking the God of the Bible as being remarkably cruel, remarkably tyrannical, sanguinary, and so on and so forth. So inevitably, that leads to Satanism. Anti-theism leads to Satanism, because if you begin to see the traditional concept of God, the ruler of the cosmos, as tyrannical, his adversary becomes increasingly sympathetic.
Some people would say that the next stage on is not Satanism. The next stage on is just atheism. Mm-hmm. It's you just sort of say, okay, I'll chuck the baby Jesus out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I suppose I'm playing devil's advocate here, but what's the argument for saying that rather than just saying it's all nonsense, to engaging with the myth? Which is basically what this is, isn't it? It's sort of saying, rather than just saying it's all nonsense, say, okay, here's the myth, I'll engage with it, and I will play within that particular field. I mean,
to play devil's advocate, I think it's significant because there are people who believe it the other way around. I mean, you see this argument crop up in atheist arguments where they'll say, perhaps we shouldn't even use the name atheist because it seems to put theism, up on a mantle. Because it's a negative. It's I'm not that. So you wouldn't call yourself an astrologer.
Yeah, okay, good
but
point.
The thing is, theists abound. That's why it's significant. Because you don't necessarily have astrologers, running the government, running public institutions, educational systems, and so on and so forth. You do have theists doing that. And so I do think it's significant to acknowledge that and to have, something that's very consciously antipathetic to that.
But I suppose what's interesting, and I guess, kind of from personal level, we've been talking a lot here about literature and history and all these sort of broad, grand things, from a very personal level. Both of us have described ourselves as Satanists. And at one level, that's a fairly crazy thing to do. And, maybe we're both crazy. I don't think we are. So
jury is out.
The jury is most definitely out. But yes, assuming that there's a hung jury on this one, why have we chosen to do this? What's the point of this? Is it just? I mean, I suppose to sort of lead. For me, this is just somewhere I kept finding myself. Mm-hmm. If you know what I mean. It was
inevitable.
Yeah, I just kept finding that the people who, by the creative individuals, seem to, like you've been describing the Romantics, and I can describe a whole catalogue of other characters like the Romantics, but also the Decadents and various other characters who seem to get into this area, and more often than not, get on the edge of it. And kind of stay on the cusp there, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Which I think, the Romantic Satanists largely did. Mm-hmm. I think if we could sort of drag the spirits of Byron and Shelley into this room right now, then my suspicion is that they probably wouldn't say they were Satanists. They'd fudge the issue. Mm-hmm. And the same is true of the vast majority of these figures there on the cusp. And we've kind of gone over that. Mm-hmm. And, why do you think you've done that?
Well, I think oftentimes people don't necessarily refer to them as things. It's often in hindsight. The Romantics didn't call themselves Romantics.
Well, that's certainly true.
That was in retrospect. But I think what you're getting at is that there has to be some sort of underlying idealism to this. Why would one do something like this, assert oneself as a Satanist or speak in the devil's defense? And I do think there has to be an underlying idealism to it.
Yeah, yeah. That's the. I think that's in one of, the irony of it, because it is an idealistic position, isn't it?
It is.
It's like atheism feels like
Almost a safe choice
a
comparatively.
cop out, and it's not as much fun.
Agnosticism is even a step beyond that, a cop out from atheism. No, but I absolutely think so. And one of the things, I say 20th century Satanism or LaVeyan Satanism, because it's presenting itself as antithetical, the opposite of traditional religion, which demands self-sacrifice, take no thought for the morrow, turn the other cheek, this sort of self-abnegation. Satanism presents itself as, being very life-fulfilling, very worldly. So you get a lot of emphasis on worldly success and so on and so forth, which to a certain extent is very valid. But there is also an extent to which Satanism, again, is idealistic and is sort of limiting, which doesn't devalue it. I think that's what makes it, if I dare say, noble. That you're deliberately stepping out of the herd, traditional terms, right? And identifying yourself as an individualist. That's limiting to a certain extent, and that's what's appealing about it. So I think in Satanism, it's sort of like Ayn Rand's objectivism. Ayn Rand's objectivism, it wants to present itself as the best possible way to live a successful, productive life in the here and now. So if you follow this, you will lead the best life possible. Now, Satanism isn't as inclusive as that. It says there are certain people who will benefit from this. Satanists are born, not made, and those who are, if they, embrace that and follow, what's natural to them, you will lead the best possible life. And I think that does the philosophy a disservice to a certain extent, because again, there is an underlying idealism, a radicalism to it, and that's what I find in the characters of Byron and Shelley, and in the myth, in Lucifer. Right, part of the appeal is that he's doomed.
I think one of the things, before we go any further, I think it's worth emphasising, which I think is implicit in our understanding of this, but isn't necessarily implicit in full stop, is that one of the notions is one of identification rather than worship. Mm-hmm. So you admire. Is admire the right word? But with Satan, the figure of Satan, you find something that's inspirational. Mm-hmm. So, and with most religions, or at least modern religion, you don't identify with Jehovah, do you? Mm-hmm. You don't identify with Muhammad or Allah. I don't know. I mean, I don't get the impression you do. Whereas with this, it's kind of like you find something. Right.
The way I describe it is the same way you would label someone a narcissist, because they have the characteristics of the mythical figure of Narcissus. Someone is a Satanist because they have the characteristics, of Satan mythically defined. Of course, the difference between the narcissist and the Satanist is that the Satanist is self-assertive about this, deliberately adopting that name as a part of their own identity in order to amplify these characteristics in them, cultivate them. That's a significant difference. And absolutely, I mean, that's what Byron and Shelley were up to. That's what the Satanic School was all about. Adoption of the Miltonic arch-rebel.
It's about ideas of, you say arch-rebel, it's about ideas of rebellion, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Of the rebel, which obviously it is an increasingly sort of complex and perplexing notion in the modern world. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, rebellion has become commodified.
Right.
James Dean, it's just like, I don't know, any one of a 1,000 rap stars who's under rebellion is being shot and launching a new range of sneakers. It's like, there needs to be more to it than that. There needs to be